One thing I should add that obviously Humane Animal Trust is very pleased to be partnering with InterNICHE and delivering some of this great work together on our side and on InterNICHE's side. So I shall hand over to Nick now and mute myself. Over to you, Nick.
Okay, thank you very much, and good to see everyone here, and many thanks to the Humane Animal Trust for the invitation, and indeed for support for one of our major new resources, which I'll be talking about during the presentation. So I'm going to share my screen and bring up my PowerPoint so you can see that, and that'll where have we, hang on, right, okay, can everyone see that fine? Here we are. Okay. So the title of today's presentation is Humane Innovations and Replacement in Education and Training. And as you'll see, we'll be talking about replacement of harmful animal use, such as animal experimentation. But because this field is about education of students and trainees, and that being humane education and training, I'm hoping to make it clear the benefits to both students and the education system and the professions on one hand, and the animals on the other. So we'll be looking at an introduction to the theme first, looking at a range of different humane innovations and ethical approaches second, and then looking at the broader pedagogical advantages of the implementation of these tools and approaches within education and training. So just a little taste of what the alternatives can include, and bear in mind that for many teachers the word alternatives is no longer really used by some, because these tools are now quite standard ways of teaching and learning for some departments, not for all, which is why there's still plenty of room for change. But I'm using the word alternatives for now just to illustrate that it is a different way of doing things to the conventional use of animals, which is often harmful. So first taste of an alternative. This is a virtual laboratory for physiology teaching, a virtual anatomy program with opacity controls and lots of opportunities for labeling and understanding structure and placement of organs and organ systems. A high-tech advanced synthetic mannequin for veterinary surgery, in this case, doing an intestinal anastomosis. And clinical learning opportunities, so working with human or animal patients as a trainee under supervision, and after having worked with non-animal methods first. This sort of apprenticeship into clinical skills and surgical work can also be a replacement for animal experiments in the same field. So animal experimentation and other harmful animal use is found in separate but related fields: education and training, the topic for today, research, and testing. Education and training we're going to focus on, and this is about education and training through the use of alternatives, not about alternatives, but through the use of alternatives in order to gain knowledge, skills, and attitudes. So these alternatives are the tools for the process of education. So it's a pedagogical issue, and it includes the gaining of technical skills. So what are the different levels and what's the structure within education? We focus on secondary, higher education and the professional levels, but primarily at the higher education level. And within that, we have the different faculties: veterinary, medical, and biology faculties. There's a few others as well, dentistry and sometimes psychology, where you might find in some departments, some faculties, harmful animal use as well. But these are the three major fields within higher education that we're going to be looking at. Within each of those, or within some of those, we have the disciplines of anatomy, pathology, physiology, surgery, and so on. Of course, the clinical skills and surgery are not there within the biology faculties, but they are within both veterinary and medical. And then within these disciplines, within these departments, there are practical classes and training events that are often organised in order to teach the knowledge, teach the skills. So this is the breakdown of higher education and where harmful animal use might be found, but also where the humane innovations and the other ethical approaches can and often have already, in some places, been implemented. Most conventional animal use has indeed been harmful. It's dissection of animals killed for the purpose of that dissection for anatomy and pathology studies. It's animal experimentation, where the animal is used alive or is killed and the organs taken out straight away for specific practical classes. And then there's other instrumental animal use, which is neither dissection nor an experiment, but might involve harm, for example, blood collection and other clinical skills that might happen within medical and veterinary fields. But it's really worth noting there is a lot of ongoing replacement and some very good progress towards that humane, fully humane education and training. And I'll be using within this presentation a number of case studies or some tastes of those examples of where that replacement has already been achieved. If we're talking about replacing harmful animal use, of course, we need to define harm. So for us, this is any action that limits the freedoms, such as freedom to live, because taking a life is a significant form of harm, and freedom from pain, injury, and disease, which is typically where an animal experiment might be denying these freedoms. There are other freedoms as well, but I won't go into them now because of time. You can see them listed, see our full definition of harm within our policy, which is on our website. We're also updating the policy with some minor changes over this year. There are also other areas where there is a negative animal welfare impact or a negative ecological impact. It's not just within the practical class. So, for example, it's the capture or breeding of animals, the transportation, of course, the experimentation or the killing, but also preserving and disposal as well. The broader impact, when you look at the whole picture, can be negative in many, many different areas. And the alternatives, the humane solutions, can often remove some or all of these negative impacts. There's often a myth that is bandied around within this area, and that is that animal experimentation is somehow the real thing. And without the real thing, you can't learn medicine or veterinary medicine or biology effectively. I want to explain why this is a myth. Another part of the myth is that alternatives, of course, are not the real thing. What I think this has a failure in is understanding that this confuses the method with the objective. Animal experimentation, for example, is just one method. And the real thing is effective gaining of knowledge and skills and attitude. So being attached to animal experimentation is not the way to meet the real objective of effective gaining of the knowledge and the skills and the attitudes that are required for the professions. That's the real thing. So in summary for this section, we're talking about curricular design, about defining teaching objectives, and which tools and which approaches can be implemented to enhance the acquisition of knowledge and skills and attitudes for the benefit of the students, the teachers, the animals, and the professions. Now to define alternatives. They are any educational tool or teaching approach that can replace harmful animal use and meet teaching objectives. But as I said, in many departments, these alternatives are now the norm, and the word is often no longer used by some teachers. They're just better ways of teaching, better ways of learning. And they include both non-animal tools, which is what most people will think of in terms of alternatives, but also, and this is very important for medicine and veterinary medicine when you're dealing with living humans, living animals as a professional later, Alternatives in education and training can also include fully humane approaches that might involve animals or indeed people, but which are ethically neutral or beneficial to those individual animals or humans. And we'll explain how there are opportunities for working with real living animals, for example, in self-experimentation and within the clinic. So what are these different types of tool and approach, these different alternative methods? The first is, of course, film and video that have been used for many, many decades to illustrate structure and more. There are models and mannequins and simulators. More advanced simulation, computer simulation, and also augmented and virtual reality. Ethically sourced cadavers, organs and tissue, human and animal. Clinical work with human and animal patients, including volunteers. Self-experimentation, that's non-invasive work on yourself and your fellow students. In vitro laboratories and ethical field studies. And we'll explore each of these different types of tool and approach now. Firstly, film and video, such as a professionally performed dissection, recorded on film, which can then be used for many, many years to illustrate structure. This is a stills image from a bird dissection, a pigeon dissection, if I remember correctly. And of course, within this, you have a professionally performed dissection. It's done well, which may not happen with the student doing the dissection. And of course, you can continue to go back to revise it, to watch it again. So very good replacement for some dissections within biology, but also within veterinary medicine too. Models and mannequins and simulators. Oh, I should just add, of course, that film nowadays is almost always digitized, so it's very flexible for use in multiple areas. Models, mannequins and simulators. This is quite a wide range of different tools available within this area. Models have been used for hundreds of years, if not longer, to show structure within a wooden or a plastic or a resin model, which may have some dissection, as you can see here, and labeling as well. Some of these models can be taken apart, of course. And again, another form of tool for learning anatomy effectively. And here you see a Victorian gentleman with his paper mache model of a human body, just to illustrate the fact that these have been used for many, many years and have their own specific advantages. Many of these tools have advantages that other methods do not have at all. And where they are shared, of course, it's important to remember that a combination of tools and approach is typically used within education and training. Just like using a book, having a lecture, having a film, the use of many different types of tool and approach often can better meet teaching objectives and make it more accessible in terms of different learning approaches. But going back to models, we have two here, and we also have another horse model that's used within the UK. I think this is at Liverpool University at the moment. And of course, with models like this, you can take them apart and put them back together again, and it gives you an opportunity to study an often life-size model of an animal or a human for that matter. This is the use of clay or plasticine in order to build up the anatomy of a model of an animal. And this, I think, is another valuable approach for education, because it's much more creative and you're building the model and it's slower. So you really have to understand the placement of the different muscles, the nerves, understanding where the skeleton is and how that relates to the other parts. And it can be one very valuable method in combination with, for example, software and other forms of modeling. And this is used quite widely within biology and medicine, and I think could be used even more widely within the veterinary field. We also now have 3D printing, very widely used, and this will continue to grow. Also 3D bioprinting, and this gives the opportunity, of course, for local production of such tools, including tools that are specifically suitable for local curricula. Most medical, veterinary and biology curricula are similar right across the world, but there are sometimes species differences in terms of what animals live in a country and what animals are studied within a curriculum. So I think 3D printing gives an opportunity both for saving money, not needing to buy new products that other people make, and also an extra degree of relevance for specific countries or faculties. But 3D printing, a lot of opportunity for building bones, for building organs, not just for anatomy, but also for some clinical skills and surgery work as well. The nature of the materials being, of course, the key element here in terms of texture, flexibility, layering, and so on. But this is a rapidly growing field, and even within 1 or 2 more years, we're going to see greater resolution and fidelity, I think, of 3D modelling and the associated opportunities for enhancing education and replacing harmful animal use. This is a more simple model that's produced in different ways. This is a multi-layered suture pad, but also it includes tubing, so you can have resting synthetic blood within it as well. So not only can you practice the very basic levels of surgical skills, such as eye-hand coordination, how to hold a scalpel, needle driver, and so on, but you've also got the opportunity of dealing with bleeding too. But it's this sort of basic level of skills where lower fidelity models are absolutely perfect. You don't need a very high fidelity model, although 5 layers is fairly mid fidelity, I think, already. But a range of different tools as you progress up the surgical training skills hierarchy. You can work on a basic model at first in order to master those skills. And without those skills, those basic skills being mastered, you're unlikely to go on to the next stage with effective competence and confidence. But a basic model is absolutely fine for basic levels of surgical skills. Slightly more advanced, you have specific models for specific species or specific organs. Here you can see someone practicing blood collection from the rabbit ear. This is the Sindava canine that we've made a film episode from our film series about. I'll talk about this a little later. But on a model like this, you can often do a very wide range of different procedures. So from intubation to so specific procedures and techniques such as intubation or taking blood, to specific processes like anesthesia, where you can practice all the different aspects of introducing and monitoring anesthesia with an animal, along with your fellow students under supervision, to much more advanced procedures such as the intestinal anastomosis and resection. We'll talk about that a little later. On the left here, you can see critical care Jerry. That's the dog, not the professor. And this dog is from a producer called Rescue Critters, who make it for clinical skills and basic surgery. But in this case, the professor from Cornell University has adapted it further with his engineering skills, linked it up with a heart pump, and introduces a simulation of a clinic where students are both in with the dog and also in the neighbouring room, and case studies of specific patients with different conditions are presented, and the students have to introduce the drugs, identify the problem, introduce the drugs, and deal with the scenario, the clinical scenario, where they have, as you can see, all the different apparatus monitoring the different heart rate and blood pressure and so on. So this is a situation where you can use a mannequin, build on it further to create a scenario in order to simulate clinical pharmacology or other areas. What's interesting about this specific situation, and we've interviewed the professor, Dr. Dan Fletcher, and filmed the use of the model, is that the students who are watching will then rotate and then come into the simulated clinic and do another case study with another patient, another virtual patient. And then the students all get together afterwards and discuss what went right, what went wrong. So it's a very equal and fair and collaborative, cooperative environment, which gives a chance to reflect on the learning process and your own learning in itself. And I think that extra level of reflection on the process of learning is as important as the exposure to models like this and the opportunity to experience a simulation for clinical pharmacology. So there's a lot of creative opportunities with a lot of these models that can be used. The right-hand side here, you can see a spay-neuter model. So this is an opportunity again for students to practice and practice and practice again until they've really mastered the castration, mastered the spay, built up the confidence, built up the competence before they go on to the next stage, which could be after basic model to more advanced model to something like this. The next stage, the following stage, will be clinical learning opportunities, spay-neuter programs in a veterinary teaching hospital or veterinary outreach, for example. And that gives a lot of hands-on experience. But it's crucial before you work with those animals, living animals, to have mastered the skills on a non-animal model first. So the repetition is really a key area here. Here you see the Sindava canine again. And this is a bleeding spleen with a pathology. So you have replaceable organs. You can practice different procedures, and you have the opportunity to learn from your mistakes, and that's really, really important. You also have the opportunity to reflect on your emotional literacy, your emotional skills, such as dealing with a crisis situation. So within our film on veterinary education and the humane innovations within it, we have one episode, the Sindava canine episode, surgery in the Sindava canine, where the 3 different labs that we feature with the students practicing their different procedures. One of them is the dropped pedicle, so a dropped ovarian pedicle, which is a crisis that can develop after doing the spay. And of course, that's an emergency situation. So the students have the opportunity to be faced with a sudden emergency, and not only needing to practice the technical skills for managing that surgery, but also dealing with the emotional impact of an emergency, of a crisis, of the potential panic, and how to manage the technical aspect to be sufficiently focused on the technical without the emotions overrunning the technical abilities. So learning how to manage your emotions, being exposed to that crisis and the emotional impact before you work with an animal that might have this condition, this emergency developing in the clinic, is really important. So again, you're better prepared. And I think alternatives in general are very good in terms of what they can offer in terms of a range of different scenarios that you may not get were you to do animal experimentation, or were you to not have any good tools at all and go straight into clinical practice. So I think they reflect a greater sensitivity to the learning process and all the different aspects of knowledge and skills, which are technical and emotional, and values and attitudes as well. So really, we're looking at creative approaches to improve the quality of education and training. Here you see another aspect of the Sindava canine, in this case, finding a foreign body, a dye, that a dog has swallowed, and you need to go through the intestine, find the dice or find the problem, and then do an enterotomy and an anastomosis in order to bring that dog back up to health. And here you can see the situation where the dog is used, again, at Cornell University in the US. And the students there learning, we were there at one of the labs, there was 3 different stations, and the students go through 3 different major procedures over the afternoon. And here you see the opportunity for guidance and mentorship as well, which is very important, I think, in terms of developing the widest range of skills and gaining those skills beyond the technical. So it's all about positioning, how you do certain aspects of the procedure, how you stand, and what to focus on and when. Here you can see the enterotomy, and there's an anastomosis just below as well. As I say, this is all featured in the film that we'll be launching shortly. The company that makes that canine, Sindava, also make human mannequins, a wide range of different mannequins for clinical skills, trauma training, and surgery as well. So here you can see the human models. And I think this also illustrates how good developments within material science can be applied within multiple areas, for example, medical and veterinary. The same production skills can be applied to a number of different areas. And in fact, it was the human mannequins made first, and then the veterinarians thought we could really benefit from this within veterinary medicine too. And so the company and the University of Florida worked together to produce the canine, and there's also a feline and a equine head and neck as well that have been produced. Within secondary level, they also have a frog dissection, not the clinical skills and surgery, but a more basic model for dissection, also a cat model too. And clinical skills labs are increasingly being developed at universities across the world, of course, veterinary and medicine, because they offer a wide range of opportunities for students to practice and keep on practicing until they've mastered those skills, and until the teachers are happy that those students or trainees have mastered those skills too. Some of these are open 24 hours, others have very specific hours, and many of the tools are developed in-house by those universities, those sometimes then marketed more widely, because then other universities don't have to reinvent the wheel. Multimedia, another type of alternative. We have the virtual anatomy program, as I say, with opacity controls and opportunities to look at different systems, to look at labeling, to compare between species, macro and micro anatomy, for example. Very, very clearly shows how technology can support the learning process, providing things that couldn't be done even 20, 30 years ago. This is a model, a virtual anatomy program developed at Colorado State University. Again, so many different layers, from full body to hind leg to head dissection, and different levels of dissection, and then all the different labeling where you can go click straight on the image to a particular structure and get the description, or click on the name of a structure and have it identified within the image, along with hyperlinks at the bottom. So very, very rich resource with thousands of images or labels, both in anatomy and also radiology in this case, and this is freely available. They also have a VR version used within the university, which I believe can be bought online as well. And this gives you an extra level of immersion into the anatomy. And I think, no, I haven't got that. But that's a very interesting area where you can really visualize structure more effectively. The second type of multimedia is the virtual laboratory. And here you can see a lab, conventional frog muscle experiment where frogs are killed, muscles or nerves, sometimes hearts, are removed, added into apparatus, and then you can do your experiment in order to understand physiological or pharmacological principles. But this can all be done virtually. So here we have a virtual lab from the University of Marburg, the Institute of Physiology, a world-renowned institute. And this software gives you the opportunity to really practice your experimental technique, and also understand all the physiological knowledge. And combined with self-experimentation, which I'll talk about shortly, you really have an opportunity to understand and apply that physiological knowledge very well. And you can do a wide range of different experiments here that can really help you understand muscle or nerve physiology. Some of these programs are free, some are very low cost. You can also have animations. This is an equine model, the equine glass horse, where you can understand, again, anatomy, but also the development of different conditions. And then you can do virtual rectal exams in order to understand how to identify those conditions, and you might also have radiology as well. So animations are another form of multimedia. And of course, apps, growing number of apps for clinical skills and surgery work. More immersive is the virtual reality that I mentioned. The virtual canine anatomy from before is also available as a VR model, virtual animal anatomy, where you can also compare between species. And VR allows you to be much more immersive. It's a more sensory environment, sometimes involving the sense of touch. This is the haptic cow and haptic horse, developed at the University of Bristol, linked with University of Glasgow. And again, you have a mannequin linked with the VR, so you can sort of identify the stage of pregnancy, for example. You don't always need a mask. You don't always need haptics, the simulation of the sense of touch, but you may want to introduce those into a model. Some of these are available. You could also make your own if that's what you wanted to do. But what about if you really need hands-on experience of animals and animal tissues? We argue for ethically sourced tissue and cadavers and organs to be used. In the Netherlands, there's a national level body donation program where companion animal guardians or pet owners can donate the body of their deceased animal who had to be put down for medical reasons into a program where those bodies can then be used for the training of veterinary students to enhance their education. And this is a national level program linked with an animal protection group, Proef de Vrij, and the University of Utrecht. And it's fully replaced the killing of animals for dissection and provides models and tissue that can be, or cadavers that can be plastinated as well. So this is a very good solution, again, within anatomy. So body donation programs, which you can find out more about at our policy. And also you can then preserve those specimens too. You might have heard of the Body World's exhibition of human and animal bodies. And of course, you can plastinate yourself. You can also do simpler, cheaper preservation using the El Nadi technique, which uses something similar to plastination, but is lower cost and can often produce more flexible specimens for use in not only anatomy and pathology, but also clinical skills and surgery training too. So you can perfuse cadavers too, human or animal cadavers. On the left, we have the POP trainer, the pulsating organ perfusion trainer from Optimist in Austria. And this is now the gold standard really for laparoscopy or minimally invasive human surgery. Could also be used within veterinary as well. In this case, slaughterhouse material is used, but you can also, I think very soon, use 3D modeling and printing to produce high resolution vessels that can be used for training in minimally invasive surgery. On the right, you have Dr. Emad Aboud, a neurosurgeon who uses donated human bodies, including human heads and brains, for practicing neurosurgeon. And these, again, both models use perfusion of synthetic blood and have pulsation, so you can simulate bleeding, and that's what's so important within surgery. And of course, clinical experience, absolutely crucial, veterinary medicine and medicine, where you can be in medicine an intern, then a resident before you get to consultancy level, but you have the chance to have that apprenticeship work and be supervised once you've learnt sufficiently on a non-animal model. But in veterinary training, there's fewer opportunities to learn before you practice. So the opportunities to work with animals in a veterinary teaching hospital is very, very important. What's important also about this is that it's very case-based, and you have a simulation of the whole situation. When you have a patient, you get to interact with the companion animal guardian, you get involved in the diagnosis, the preparation for a procedure, the operation, and the post-operative care and recovery. You see the whole picture. It's more realistic than an animal experiment. So there's a lot of opportunities here where outreach work and teaching hospital work can further enhance training and also replace experiments within surgery. You also get to learn caring as a clinical skill. Often emotions are seen as either an irritation at best or an obstacle at worst, where in fact emotions such as caring are crucial within a caring profession. It sounds obvious, but it's amazing how caring and emotional literacy is often dismissed or seen as a problem and something in the way of technical skills, where actually both are absolutely crucial. And if you're doing an operation with a patient, you need to have the context of care to ensure the best procedure and best recovery, but also the ability to go into clinical detachment for the procedural technical work and then come back out again to encourage full recovery. So learning caring as a clinical skill is crucial. You can do experiments on yourself, non-invasive, of course, but here you see an experiment with the BioPack student lab, where students can use electrodes to give a very minor electric shock in order to look at nerve response, nerve conductivity. And in combination with software, this is really an excellent double approach to learning and understanding physiology. You can do urine analysis, exercise physiology too. So a lot of opportunities for working on yourself in a student group, both for medicine and veterinary medicine, but also for biology too. It's also more fun. And the number of people I've spoken to whose animal experiments in education put them off their planned career, or was just created a bad environment, including a bad learning environment. I can't tell you how many people have felt that. Whereas in this sort of situation, for human medicine, you have your own reference body, the right reference object, your own body, which is very valuable, but also it can be a fun environment. Learning when it's fun is also very valuable for the learning process. You can do work in vitro. This is very, very important, I think, for the growing areas of in vitro work within research and testing. I think that in combination with artificial intelligence, AI and data, work with big data, very, very important to be able to practice at your higher education level. And you can also even do work with plant material instead of animal material. So cell respiration experiments don't need to use rat liver mitochondria. You can get those mitochondria from turnips and do the same biochemistry experiment. So a lot of opportunities to work in vitro and to work in the field, getting out of the lab into the field, especially for biology, and also to some degree within veterinary medicine too. Seeing frogs within their actual environment, living within their ecological context, I think is a very valuable lesson and helps work against the very sort of compartmentalized and reductionistic approach that has often dominated medicine and the life sciences. So those are the different types of alternatives. Now I'm aware we don't have so much time, so let me move on to the final stage of the presentation. Teaching objectives. This is really the main area. Standard teaching objectives can be met better using these humane innovations and approaches. And these studies can confirm that. You can see studies on our studies database on our website at interniche.org, for example. You can also gain new objectives such as learning caring as a clinical skill, practicing specific procedures, having the chance to do them so many times, of course, as well, but also specific new procedures that are very hard to simulate or that you might have to wait years to see in the clinic or to experience in the clinic. So you have new opportunities too, as well as everything that technology can bring in terms of deeper understanding. And you can also obviate or remove the negative lessons of the hidden curriculum, such as learning that animals are disposable, for example, becoming desensitized through harmful animal use. Those are negative lessons that you might be presented with through harmful animal use, and alternatives manage to remove those so you can focus on the real teaching objectives and better teaching of those. I think alternatives are also more in accordance with life science philosophy, biology as the study of life, medicine and veterinary medicine as healing, not harming approaches. And also, I should also go back to critical thinking skills as well. Some tools are very much developed in order to encourage your critical thinking skills And when the teachers implement them, I think the teachers themselves demonstrate better clinical skill, better critical thinking skills in terms of really looking at what the evidence is for harmful animal use being the best method. I think when teachers question that, when they look at the evidence, when they see what other tools are available and they implement them, I think that is also a good lesson for the students to understand that things can evolve, things must evolve, and there are other ways of doing things when you look into things more deeply. Emotional literacy, compassion, empathy, respect for life, understanding your emotions and how that may impact on your clinical work or other forms of awareness, I think is very important too. And the same with ethical literacy. There's a lot of ethical issues in medicine and veterinary medicine and biology where the more practice you have thinking about ethical issues, identifying them, solving them, having a more solutionary approach, I think is very, very important. So having an ethical education, but also addressing and considering ethical issues is very important. When you use alternatives, your education is also more accessible to people, for example, who might have religious or moral objections to harmful animal use, but also the range of tools being more accessible in terms of different learning styles and different entry points. So it's a more inclusive method approach when you use a variety of non-animal methods. And you're not going to be pushing students to do things against their will or actively discriminating against them. So I think there are broader social issues here in terms of student rights. But also I think when you introduce such tools, you can actually have a much greater and more positive reputation as an institute, as a faculty, as an individual teacher, because you're reflecting on teaching objectives and looking into better ways of meeting them. Animal freedom, of course, animals not being used or not being used in a harmful way is very important. We can fully replace harmful animal use and have a more positive ecological impact too. And this has its impact later on in terms of how the professional, your new professionals work. It's going to be better within society for the animals and the doctors when they have learnt better. So therefore, healthcare will be improved as well. And there's an opportunity for saving money as an institute, selling the alternative you might have produced yourself, beyond the fact that some alternatives cost. Some might be high cost, some might be free, but overall your investment will be worth it. And legislation. The legislation in most countries states that alternatives should be used wherever possible. And from our experience and looking at the studies, there are departments all across the world covering every practical class within all these disciplines where only the alternatives are used. And that is what the film we're making and a future case studies book will also illustrate. It can be done. So the legislation that argues for replacement and alternatives only can indeed be fully adhered to, and often that's not the case when animals are used harmfully and the alternatives do exist. So in conclusion, in our opinion, and the opinion of those teachers who've introduced these tools for everyone's benefit, the alternatives are superior to harmful animal use. 100% replacement of that harmful animal use is indeed possible. That might mean working with real animals, living animals, but in a way that can actually benefit them. There's a diverse range of tools and approaches with alternatives for every class already available. And there's a growing momentum and success with alternatives now seen as the norm by most of those teachers. So it's really a win-win solution, a win-win situation. There's a multiple positive impact where students benefit from having access to high quality, well-designed learning tools so can learn better. Teachers benefit because they can pass on their knowledge and skills more effectively using these tools and approaches. The animals, of course, benefit. They're not being used harmfully. They might even be worked with in a healing environment and benefit too. And the professions benefit because better trained medical and veterinary students and biology students will be entering those professions with their critical thinking skills intact, rather than having learned conformity, with ethical literacy and emotional literacy, rather than desensitization and a non-understanding of ethical issues. And of course, society benefits as well, because those professionals will be working within society and the broader natural context. So really everyone can benefit. And I think it's a very exciting field. And there's a lot of good progress within testing as well. Some challenges within research, but also growing technologies, new technologies, bringing about change in those areas too. So I think it's quite an exciting time with some really, really positive progress. So I'm happy to be involved in that. And I'm sure many of you listening are also involved in some way or supportive of this positive progress. So thank you very much for listening. Feel free to make contact. Here are my contact details, and I'll pass you back to the trust for any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Nick. Really insightful presentation. We're going to be taking some questions now, so if you want to type your questions in the chat. I'm just going to start with a couple of questions myself, if you don't mind.
Sure.
One of the points I think interesting from a Human Animal Trust perspective as well. Obviously, you listed some of the human techniques as well as the veterinary ones. In your sort of working life, how do you find the knowledge exchange and the sharing of the technologies that are available between the human and the veterinary world?
Yes, I think there's a lot of challenges there in terms of how much people share. I mean, often there's limited sharing even between departments within medicine or veterinary medicine or biology. So there are issues, I think, with people just being so focused and so busy within their area that they're not really linking up sufficiently with other departments. And then, of course, there's working between universities. But I think there's a lot of multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary opportunities there to learn from some models or mannequins that have been developed, or computer software models that have been developed in one area that could be applied into others. And certainly within our alternatives database on our website, we have a lot of human models, mostly sort of clinical skills and surgery, but also a few within anatomy that might be also relevant or inspiring to people within the veterinary field. So I think it's always worth looking, even between medicine and veterinary medicine, at what the different tools are, because they could easily be applied, either the same model when it comes to something basic, or something very similar for something more advanced and more species specific, or organ specific, or procedure specific, where you could really sort of understand and develop a new model yourself. So I think, yeah, a lot of opportunities. Some are often missed, but certainly there are some differences between the fields. So veterinary medicine has much less money than human medicine. So there's a wider range of, for example, advanced VR methods used for medical surgical training, and less within veterinary. So sometimes it's a financial issue. But I think, yeah, a lot of opportunities there for learning from other disciplines and other faculties or fields that currently have limited, that those opportunities are not taken as much as we would like to see, I think.
Thank you for that. I think it's in a way that's not surprising. So we've got quite a few questions in the chat now, so I shall move on to that, starting with Chris Elwood. So thank you for the presentation. And the question is, have you found that any particular of the bioscience subjects are more open to using non-harmful animal alternatives than others?
I think a lot of it depends on where people come from. So when there's very, very conservative traditions of doing the same as always has been done, then that really sort of can limit progressive change. And that's not just something where you might have a sort of state level sort of conformity like former Soviet Union, but also I think in say the US, where there's been a lot of harmful animal use as well. But I think when people really focus on what the teaching objectives are, and that maybe is certainly the case within sort of clinical skills and surgery, then there can be people sort of detaching from the conformity to really thinking about what the teaching objectives are, maybe auditing courses to see what the teaching objectives are and how effectively skills are experienced and also retained. Then I think people are more open to thinking about different tools being used, and also where there's money to think about developing or buying a product that can maybe better meet those objectives. So I think maybe within clinical skills and surgery there's a greater openness than some other fields, but also even physiology and pharmacology and using software with virtual labs. I think when people see the benefits of those, they often have the chance to think, okay, yes, we can meet these objectives in the same way and maybe meet new objectives as well. So I think exposure is maybe one of the biggest areas there. So going to events with the tools to show people being able to borrow such tools, software, for example, to try them out and realize that they can often do exactly the same thing and better. I think there's a growing openness to that. And I think with computer literacy and like even older teachers now, in most countries, we're thinking globally, have the opportunity to, with their growing computer literacy, to think about different methods, certainly the computer-based, technology-based tools. I think more people are open to that. The challenge is also, of course, in terms of growing class sizes, in terms of being able to network resources across a department or a faculty. Also make people think, okay, we need to find new ways of doing things. So when you need to be more cost effective to manage greater class sizes, to think about ways of better assessing people's results, for example, so the monitoring of people's work, students' work. I think people, again, are thinking of new ways. So from our experience, there's been some good progress in veterinary medicine. Actually, looking at North American practices, my colleague found that in biology, things were actually slower to change than they thought within medicine and human medicine. Human medicine, of course, people are often thinking, okay, really, we should be focusing on humans. So much of the animal use has been stopped in a lot of human medicine, not entirely, but within biology, somehow things are a little bit more conservative. So perhaps there's some greater change needed within the biology area.
Interesting. I think part of it sort of brings us on to the next question as well from Claudia. Which are the countries that are, in your experience, most advanced in using alternatives, or where is the trend the greatest? And what, in your opinion, are the reasons that in these countries many courses that converted?
Yeah, this is tricky. I mean, we've done some work in continuing now, actually, even during the war within Ukraine, but also Russia and Belarus, where we along with colleagues in Germany, managed to have signed agreements with individual departments to replace harmful animal use there. And within those departments, there were often very few teaching resources at all. From the collapse of funding many years ago, there were often very few resources at all. So coming in with a projector, a few laptops, some software alternatives and some models brought in tools that just weren't being used at all. So there's a great openness. I think once the initial changes happened some years ago with a few faculties being willing to try out new methods, even sometimes against the conservative guidance from national level bodies related to that discipline or that faculty, then I think people were sort of open to it and saw the power of technology. So where there's very few resources, anything, including humane methods, can provide something that keeps everyone very happy. Also, countries with more money, Western European, US countries, some Far Eastern countries, where good new technologies, including virtual reality. I think also you have the excitement of technological innovation, which can be good for both teachers and students for newer ways of learning. And that can sort of bring in some change. And again, the focus is on teaching objectives and the use of technology. It might not even be particularly about animal protection, but that can bring about some change. But then you also do have some other national level and cultural sort of differences. So generally, veterinary medicine in the UK, surgery is learnt in the clinic and with non-animal methods, whereas in the US, for example, although there's been a lot of good change, terminal surgeries where animals were used for surgical practice and then killed at the end still exist in some places. So it might have gone down to sort of 10-20% for small animals, for example, but still larger animals might be used for terminal surgeries fairly widely. So you have some sort of traditions where there are differences between countries, but I think there's interest in these new methods, and there is implementation, and often it's a combination of sort of educational challenges with number of students and needing to save money, the excitement of technology, assessing courses, reviewing courses, auditing courses to really look at teaching objectives and how well they are met, or what they are and how well they are met. And it's a combination of all these different interests, and certain countries or cultures might have a greater emphasis on some more than others. For example, financial opportunities or economic obstacles. So it's very, very difficult to say. And one challenge, of course, is that we don't have a very good baseline sort of awareness of what the animal use is, because the statistics aren't kept well enough, limited keeping of stats for procedures, and often zero keeping of statistics for animals killed in advance for dissection. So it's very hard to know what the current situation is, other than anecdotally or just from people's experience over time. So yeah, I think it really does develop a lot, but it's important to look at what the opportunities and obstacles are within every country and culture, but also within the departmental sort of culture within individual universities too.
Okay, I think the next question you partially answered and is related again. Do you find there's a difference in the level of interest in terms of developing these tools in developed and developing countries, for example?
Yes, I mean, in some developing countries, there may not be a very large laboratory animal or animal breeding sort of reality, which might sort of limit positively the number of animals that can be used within education, because some animals are waste animals that come from research and testing, and there's just a less of a culture of using animals. So you do sometimes find that animals are just not used by tradition in some places, or within some developing countries animals are used, or animals such as cattle are much more part of the community and cultural practices, so that it's more of a large animal scenario rather than animals as companion animals, as pets. So sometimes there's differences within species there. Certainly the more expensive mannequins or virtual reality would not be affordable by some or many developing countries. Although it's worth bearing in mind that even the more advanced mannequins can often last decades. They might have replaceable parts that get used and need replacing, but the mannequins themselves can last a long time. And buying such a tool in a Western country, buying an animal, sorry, for use within those classes is also quite expensive. Hence the degree of replacement within the West for such models, where a university could afford to buy bred dogs, for example. So you can save money in the West. And also, I think over time, the investment from whatever country is clear in terms of better quality training. But the initial capital investment can be quite costly. So I'd say that for certain models, certainly virtual reality, more advanced models can be limiting for developing countries. But there's also, I think, the growing accessibility of good hardware and software is such that even more basic virtual reality models can be available and affordable across the world. So I think there's a lot of opportunities with free resources, whether it's free software or a body donation program, or the production of your own tools within your own country. for use where things can be affordable globally. But there are certain tools where the cost is prohibitive, but over time, even those costs will be going down.
Okay, that's very helpful. We've got a couple of more questions, and in the interest of time, I'm going to swap them around. And actually, one of them relates to what you've just said in terms of the Sindava surgical model. Obviously, that's quite an expensive outlay for an institution. So what would be the motives for the lecturers to convert to these alternatives? And also, is there a material that shows cost comparison in terms of the usage?
I think, like I said, in the West, buying dogs for surgical practice is something that does cost. Every lab, every year, they are new costs. When you buy a more advanced mannequin, such as the Sindava surgical canine, that's your initial outlay. It is a capital investment, but not only will you begin saving money in terms of not having to buy bred dogs, for example, straight away, but over time you'll see that you end up saving money. And like I said, they can last decades, the models. So I think the main reason for people introducing them is a pedagogical reason. You can gain skills more effectively when you have the opportunity to practice and practice and practice, when you have the opportunity to learn from your mistakes, when you have the opportunity to deal with a simulated crisis environment, which feels very real when you're a student with a bleeping emergency equipment sort of at the side of you, and a teacher sort of saying, okay, your blood pressure's going up, what are you going to do? What's the reason for this this problem? Then I think you start to realize that actually, yeah, the investment was worth it. You're going to get the rewards straight away. So the pedagogical reasons, I'd say, are the main reasons for teachers introducing such tools. You can learn better, you can learn new skills, and you can remove some of the problems. The ethical issues, of course, that's very important. And I think the pressure from the public and from the students and some teachers to avoid harmful animal use is there as a broader context, and certainly helps encourage the thinking about which tools to use, and the creative approach to finding ethical tools, ethical approaches. So I think that's very important too. But the financial one, I think really it's only the more expensive models where you have to think about capital investment or not. And there are so many different tools and approaches. We have over 1,500 detailed in our alternatives database, and that's just one limited database in terms of what's available. And doesn't include anything that a teacher could create themselves, of course. All of those tools, there's a whole range of different tools, different types of tools, from software to models to advanced mannequins, which can be used instead. So there's a lot of opportunities, I think, there aren't really so many limits. I think one of the biggest obstacles is really overcoming the inertia of just doing the same thing that has always been done, and thinking, okay, really, what am I trying to achieve here? What are the skills? What's the knowledge we're trying to achieve? What are the values and the attitudes we want from graduates? And how can we do things in a better way? But of course, teachers are very busy too. And I think that's why case studies are very important, and why we've included them within our film on veterinary education, which will be going through all the disciplines with a range of different tools and approaches, and also a future case studies book, so that people don't need to reinvent the wheel. People can see, oh yes, this is already implemented. These are the obstacles the teachers faced. This is how they produced their own or bought and implemented tools. And I think really there's a global change with tools like this implemented, as I said, such as now they are the standard ways of doing things.
That's very helpful. And I think, as you say, I think the inertia is that's a cross-discipline issue that is the main thing to overcome. And hopefully we can look forward to a time when these things will not be happening at all. So I've got one final question, which I think is a really good one to end on. In terms of your examples, do you have any projects that you've been involved with that you're particularly proud of, that have perhaps had a significant impact in their field, country, or institutions, for example?
Difficult to say. I think certainly the work in some former Soviet countries has been very rewarding in terms of signing agreements and getting lists of courses and animal use and how many animals for each class have either been replaced directly or are where the animal use is part of the curriculum and they should in theory be done, but finances mean that they can't be. And then the alternatives getting implemented create pretty much, a situation that's going to continue, because of course, when you've got very few tools or poor tools and you introduce good new tools, then that's going to be a sustainable thing. So you get full replacement and it's sustainable. So it's a very good sort of project. InterNICHE has worked with Doctors Against Animal Experiments in Germany, and also People for Animal Rights Germany, and signing these agreements. And that's been really, really good. And tens of thousands of animals have been replaced as a result. But similarly, at a sort of legislative angle, from that angle, in Brazil, a number of animal experiments are now illegal in terms of demonstrations and some sort of physiology and pharmacology experiments. So within veterinary surgery, for example, it's pretty much a national level change where legislation has sort of argued against experiments and for alternatives. And similarly within India, InterNICHE was part of a network of organizations influencing the Universities Grants Commission, the UGC, who helped define the biology curriculum. And pretty much zoology dissections have now ended in India. So when you've got a national level centralized sort of ruling, firstly discouraging and then banning animals for dissection within zoology, then you get change at a national level. So it's probably tens of millions of animals not being used nationally across one of the biggest, most populous countries in the world. And I'm happy that we could play a role in influencing and convincing the UGC that actually the alternatives can do a better job, and with of course a better pedagogical impact and also environmental, because most frogs are going to be wild caught. So you end up with lots of positive localized impact too. So that's a very large number of animals that are being used. But I think all those students who conscientiously object to the harmful animal use in their education, all those teachers who are thinking about teaching objectives and buying or developing their own tools, every one of those changes, all the producers, of course, making them as well, and the companies that might do that, all of those different roles are crucially important. Without any one of those individuals and groups doing work, things would be more limited. And once you've produced a good tool, and implemented and seen the benefits, not only is that a great example for other people, but of course you create very good change within your own department, within your own faculty. So I think it's very much a sort of collective situation where everyone has got a good role to play, whether you're developing technology in computing or in material science, or it's more about saying no to some practices or saying yes to some good practices. Every one of these individuals and organizations and companies and universities are playing a role. And it's very positive to see that, because, as I said, there's a multiple positive impact. Everyone and everything can benefit from it. That's not to say there's never a negative impact for a positive impact for every tool. Of course, software involves plastic and energy, and there's some impact there. But overall, the impact is positive pedagogically, ethically, scientifically, environmentally, and often financially too. So I think there's some great progress, and I'm happy to be part of that along with many other people.
That's great, and it's great to hear some of those numbers. Obviously, there's still a lot more work to be done across the world, but it's great to hear that. So thank you very much for really insightful and informative presentation. Thank you to everybody who has taken part, and I hope you can join us for some of our other webinars as well. remember, is first Friday of every month, apart from August, when most people are taking some sort of holidays. So thank you very much again to Nick, and thank you to everybody for joining in, and have a lovely rest of the Friday afternoon and a lovely weekend. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.